Hey everyone, my name is David Guest. I'm the new executive director of the Chestnut Hill Conservancy. Really excited to welcome you this evening. This is my first Ask the Experts as executive director. I started about a month ago. We're really happy to have you here. If you're not familiar with the work of the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, really encourage you to visit our website and explore and stop by and visit us at 8708 Germantown Avenue. We're an organization that's actually been around since 1967, first as the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, and our overall mission is dedicated to preserving the historical, architectural, and cultural resources and open spaces of the Chestnut Hill area and the Wissahickon watershed. So there's a lot going on there that is for you to explore. I'm just going to go through a few sort of introductory and housekeeping matters before we begin the program. So first, I want to thank the people who put in a lot of hard work to get this program together. Chrissy Clausen, our Director of Programs and Communications, was the main person getting it together, and she was assisted by our all-star co-chairs of our Programs Committee, Jean McCoubry and Rob Fleming, who are also our board members, and they put in a lot of work on this and other programs that we have throughout the year. So I want to thank them and the whole program committee for putting this on. I also want to thank our sponsors. Excuse me. As always, our generous support is from our lead sponsor, Chubb. You can see our other general sponsors here on the screen, who we're also very thankful for, and want to especially thank Ace Hardware and Home Services, which is our 2025 Ask the Experts event sponsor, and our supporting sponsor, E.G. Rawl. So thanks again to our sponsors. Obviously, without them, we could not make this happen. There you go. They're the logos for those sponsors I just mentioned. I'll in a minute turn it over to Ann McNiff at the Chestnut Hill Community Association, who we offer Ask the Experts in collaboration with CHCA, and she'll be speaking for a moment after me. Briefly, just want to mention we do have more Ask the Experts programming coming up throughout the year, and we'll be adding programs. So you can always check our website, chconservancy.org, for that. Our next one is going to be May 3rd at the Conservancy, which is going to be a lecture and demonstration with Anderson Ironworks called The Art and Craft of Ornamental Ironwork, which should be really fun. And there's still a few tickets available for that, so please check it out. Just to wrap up, as a reminder, please do keep yourself muted during the presentation. There will be a question and answer session at the end, led by Rob Fleming. And we ask that you put in your questions into the chat, and it'll be reviewed during the presentation. So you can just go ahead and do that during the presentation if things come up to you, and they'll be addressed afterwards. So with that, I'm happy to pass it along to Ann from CHCA, and then Matt Prager from Ace Hardware and Home Services will speak briefly and introduce our presenter, Jeff Lorenz. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Ann.
Great. Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for I think what's going to be a really interesting and important Ask the Experts. I want to say thank you to the Conservancy for inviting us to collaborate with them on these events every year. We've really enjoyed it and really think it's an important thing to make available to our community. For those of you who are not familiar with the Community Association, we are a more than 75-year-old civic organization here in Chestnut Hill, and we serve the greater Chestnut Hill area with events, both free community events as well as some events that cost something. But we also do advocacy work, and that's probably an aspect of the work we do that not everybody knows about. So you're going to be hearing more and more about that. And certainly if you are receiving the Chestnut Hill Local, you have probably read about it. But please stay tuned for some of the work we're doing in many cases, along with the Conservancy in improvements to the community. Things like making sure that the trains continue to run, that SEPTA continues to have a line both on the west and east side of Chestnut Hill. We're also very interested in pedestrian safety, many of you may have participated in a community meeting that we had regarding the need for replacement of crosswalks on Germantown Avenue. And that's really just a sort of snapshot of the work that we're doing, as well as planning for those fun events that are coming up, including Hoops Madness, Pastorius Park concerts, which always are a summer favorite, and then August movie nights. So there's a lot going on. I'm going to echo what David said and suggest if you'd like to learn more to please look at our website at chestnuthill.org. Nice and easy. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce officially Matt Prager from Ace Home Services, who is the sponsor for tonight's Ask the Expert series.
Thank you, Anne. As mentioned, my name is Matt. I am the marketing coordinator for Ace Hardware Home Services in Philadelphia. We're formerly Unique Indoor Comfort. Some of you may have used us in the past. I've been with the company since April of 2022. You may have seen me and some of my colleagues at our table during the spring and fall festivals at Chestnut Hill, or may have seen me out in the neighborhood, one of the restaurants, or at Wednesday trivia at the brewery. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Jeff Lorenz. Jeff is the founder of Refugia Design, based in Greater Philadelphia. He blends decades of experience in landscape design with a forward-thinking approach to ecological innovation. His philosophy focuses on creating immersive outdoor sanctuaries that work with nature rather than against it. Jeff is a creative visionary and a leader in sustainable landscape design, having been featured in Fine Gardening, Martha Stewart Living, Gardenista, and Architectural Digest. Refugia has earned recognition both nationally and internationally, winning awards from the Association of Professional Landscape Designers, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and the Perennial Plant Association. Through their ecological greenway network, Jeff and his team address pressing environmental challenges, designing landscapes that are resilient, beneficial, and beautiful. Tonight, Jeff will share his insights into designing sustainable landscapes that restore biodiversity while enhancing outdoor spaces. His work proves that thoughtful design can be aesthetically striking and be an essential tool in combating climate change. Following Jeff's presentation, we'll open the floor for a moderated Q&A with Rob Fleming, so feel free to submit your questions in the chat. Jeff, we're very excited to hear from you. Welcome, and ready to get started.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to present tonight. And really, my presentation could go in so many different directions. I'd love to kind of just keep it focused around some of the work that we do. I've kind of reconstructed this presentation from Frankenstein of different presentations that I've done over the years, just to make some relevant points that I would love to readdress in Q&A. I love doing Q&A. So I'm going to kind of just walk through a little bit of the history of our company, talk a bit about the way that we really zero in on the work that we do, which heavily focuses on using creativity and ecology. And then I would just love to have just a fun kind of Q&A conversational back and forth towards the end of this. So speaking to like the many directions that I could kind of go in with, it's kind of like an internal saying that we have at our company, putting plants to work. And what we really mean by that is like, we can enjoy as either plant lovers or gardeners or admirers of the natural world, if you will. We tend to appreciate plants based on their appearance and sometimes forget their very important ecological superpowers in the ecosystem, and also how we can find ways to kind of harness both the design aesthetic and also at the same time think about how we can create landscapes that restore or at least put back many of the natural systems that we've through human development really fractured, broken up, or more or less kind of annihilated in both urban, suburban, and rural areas. And so we don't like to wave fingers and say, you should have done it this way, or you should have done it that way. We just like to use our work to inspire. And I think to kind of go to this first slide, I don't like to get too deep into facts, but I am constantly kind of brought back into focus the idea that we're and don't take this the wrong way, but I think we're kind of like the slow cooking lobster here in thinking about where we are with climate change and global warming. It's really my father was an environmental consultant. When I was in third grade, I presented at a science fair on global warming, and it was probably 1983 or 84, and people looked at me like I was crazy. Like no one had any idea what I was talking about, and I probably didn't either at that age. But being raised in a family that kind of like understood this, kind of like through my father's work, etc., I always assumed that people were more understanding of like what a deep issue this is and what a present issue this is, and something that's not, you know, decades away or generations away, but we're actually living in it right now. And I think that this chart kind of looks at that with a really good perspective, right? Like that people worry about global warming, according to this Gallup poll, quite a lot, a great deal. But do we think that it's a threat within our lifetime? Well, yeah, 45% of this study say yes, but 54% say no. And I feel that's one of the kind of like fundamental issues that as a society we have to face kind of in real time. But we also have kind of this exciting opportunity to use our love for gardening or our love for the natural world as just a very simple way to create tangible change and to encourage neighbors and the overall population of like different ways that we can be like creating not just beautiful landscapes or functional landscapes, but looking a little bit deeper, like what is this doing on a larger scale? I'm sorry for the resolution on this slide, but I thought this was kind of interesting. I was just looking at how the like concern for the quality of the environment has really kind of peaked in public interest in the last decade. And furthermore, you know, if we weigh it out with like what we hear in the news a lot about economic growth, and we're worried about the economy, when we zoom out, people are very concerned with environmental protection. At least according to this set of statistics, people on average tend to be a bit more concerned about environmental protection than economic growth. Take it for what it is. But I think it's important to kind of zoom out sometimes and remember that, you know, that we're just what we see on the news is not really what's happening in the natural world. And I think that for our company and for the work that we do, one of the things that we can all do a better job of, or really think about how our landscapes can be functional, not just on an ecological level, but also on an inspirational level to inspire and maybe change or convert what we consider like a traditional landscape design or a traditional landscape, and also think about how our public land can provide more of an experience to reconnect with nature. Behind this quote here is a picture from one of our displays from the Philadelphia Flower Show in 2022. We really had a lot of fun with it when it was outdoors for 2 years. And I couldn't agree with this quote more. Design landscapes that provoke those who experience them to become more aware of their actions and effects in the environment and care enough to make changes. And that really kind of solidifies the ethos of our business. We're landscape designers, and we're also creatives. And so we're always exploring ideas and ways of allowing our human curiosity to venture beyond kind of just like our day-to-day human experience, and to tap back into the environment that we live in, and kind of use that for solace, but also as a way to kind of like engage with the much bigger picture of the universe here, that we're not just functioning on a human level, we're inside of an ecosystem, and sharing this space with multiple other species and organisms. And so we aim to create outdoor living spaces and kind of immersive landscapes that draw us outside. We consider the landscape kind of an extension of our living space. And how can we create habitat for wildlife and also immersive spaces for humans to really just engage with the natural world around us, so we don't just have to go to a park or go on vacation somewhere to experience nature on a heightened level, but we can actually just invite it back to our own properties, big or small, and just engage in that kind of symbiotic relationship that we've had for millennia. But with modern technology, we feel like we're separated from it, but we're not. If you think about breathing, we have lungs inside of our body, but the lungs only do half the work. The air that we breathe is on the outside of, like, we're only half of the system of the breathing, right? Like our bodies only engage in half of that system. In the big picture, we are absolutely wedded to and part of the atmosphere that we live in. And I like to kind of think about it that way, that like we are not separated in any way, shape, or form, except by the way that we've kind of established our thinking or philosophies or our dialogue around like us and them in the landscape or in the natural world. This is a picture of my daughter in my parents' backyard, which we converted to a meadow about 8 years ago. And we work a lot with young families on primarily actually postage stamp properties, and then a lot of like mid-sized suburban properties. But our goal is always not just to maybe hit the normal topics that we might think about with native landscapes or ecological landscapes, where we're reducing lawn or thinking about stormwater or providing pollinator habitat, but also what are we doing within the landscape to create these kind of like peaks in curiosity for adults and children, and just ways to kind of re-immerse ourselves in the landscape. So we're always exploring that. And one of the ways that we found it most effective to engage the public, to engage people just even in our own neighborhood. Our business is located in Narberth, where I live. I live right around the corner from our office, and primarily like during the pandemic, we put these signs up. We developed an ecological greenway network to kind of connect all of our projects into a network of kind of ecological islands, if you will, that once you start to populate an area, they become a massive green space in and of themselves, kind of like taking Doug Tallamy's message, but really putting it into action in small communities. And we've had a lot of success in pedestrian-friendly communities in particular. And so in Narberth, we would put these signs up in front of our projects, and especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when suddenly we were outside more, the human world kind of shut down. We could kind of hear nature and see nature again a bit more. We were engaging with our neighbors more. We were outside. And so it was interesting to see that this sign that we had made simply to just kind of like say, hey, look what we did here, became this kind of calling card, where when people were out walking around and kind of engaging with neighbors, they were also seeing some of our landscapes probably for either the first time, or maybe they saw it in passing and didn't really think much of it. And that they definitely sometimes look different. But these signs became this kind of just little like insight into what they were looking at. And I like to think that our heightened awareness of nature at that time, because we didn't have as much noise pollution, among other things, just allowed us to pay a little bit more attention. And so if we just simply said, hey, here's what you're looking at, it would just pique a curiosity. And for whatever reason, it really took off. And we grew from a company of 10 to over 30 in 3 years. And we could not handle, to be quite honest, some of the volume of work. It happened almost overnight, and it gave me a great sense of hope that, with some basic, I guess I use the word calling card, but just some basic, here's what you're looking at, like a tiny billboard, explaining that this is not just a landscape or a garden on somebody's property, but it has a deeper function to it. And a lot of times that really begins with the plants. But one of the ways that we wanted to kind of showcase this was by creating an ArcGIS map, which you can find on our website, which shows all of our greenway properties, and they just populate year after year, to a point where we have over 100 properties within a 5-mile radius of Narberth alone, and well over 200 in our network. And I kind of like the idea that these look a little bit like constellations. As we zoom in, as we will kind of like over Narberth here, you start to see, like on this map, anything that you see in green that's public, that's either public parks or protected land. So you can see Fairmount Park here, and you can see the parts of the Wissahickon. We have Cobbs Creek Park down here, but between those spaces, there's very little connective ecological space. We like to call them like ecological dead zones, where really like turf grass and more traditional landscapes are not providing the habitat and the forage, even the winter kind of overwintering, that species had experienced for millennia. They don't have that space anymore, and also are having landscapes that can support the migration of birds and insects. We've basically decimated it. And so I like looking at things through this kind of like lens of a map, where you can really kind of see where suddenly, and the ones that you see kind of lit up in the center here, are just within the radius of Narberth. But anything that you see kind of in this blue areas, are other projects that we've done in the area. And as we zoom in further, you start to see how we're able to kind of stitch green space together. Any of these blue kind of halos or blue zones that you see around properties that we've done, that's just based on kind of an average of how far either birds or insects or mammals will travel from their dwelling spaces to seek food. And so if we put that overlay on this map, you start to see how we're able to create these pathways of connectivity just simply by lighting up not even the entire property, but even just providing small garden spaces that basically put back into action the plants that these various insects, birds and mammals have recognized and had symbiotic relationships for thousands and thousands of years. And we've seen it starting to pick up in other areas that we work in, like Haddonfield, which is featured here. And so we like to think that we have these little constellations popping up everywhere. And really the point of me showing you this is just to say that through some very simple efforts, we're able to inspire the population and inspire humans to go, wait, there's like, we already have this kind of like fetish with plants and with gardening, especially in the Philadelphia area. It's maybe unofficially called the garden capital of America because we have so many public parks around here and so many public gardens. We're really spoiled. If I've been out and about and like doing talks in another state or something like that, and I mentioned where I'm from, people are always like, "Oh, you live really close to Longwood Gardens or Mount Cuba." Like they're kind of like amazed, and I've just taken it for granted because I grew up around it. But I have to take that to be like, well, people think that our area is pretty special in that regard, and also a lot of the thought leaders, especially in the ecological landscape movement and landscape design, are from this area. And so anyway, I will just kind of like zip through, just kind of showing like we have these signs up in front of this. This is a property right in Mount Airy. We work on a lot of postage stamp properties. So, this happens to be in Narberth. This is on Anthwyn Lane in Narberth. We have 7 houses on this block, and you can see just the difference between the kind of more traditional lawn and foundation plantings on the left, and then our more heavily planted habitat gardens on the right. And it's not only to provide habitat for wildlife, but we're also really focused in, especially in Narberth, we have like horrible conditions for stormwater. There's lots of groundwater which has been like diverted underground, like old streams that have been diverted underground. In fact, on this street, it slopes gently down to a much lower elevation. And when they were doing road work a few years ago, they found a dock when they were excavating. And it turns out that the bottom of Anthwyn Road used to be a lake. It is no longer, obviously, but the soil on this street, when you get down to a certain elevation, doesn't perk. It's all like mica clay, and it's a stormwater nightmare, really. So we've gotten a lot of work on this street because we've had success kind of, I would say, like kind of rerouting, putting diverse root systems back into these landscapes and allowing the soil and the land to kind of like sponge up stormwater again. And so I'll just kind of zip through some of these slides quickly, but I do think it's important to look at it from this focal point. I just really appreciate this slide because I like the title Turf Nation, but also if you really look at like where we exist within this like 95 corridor of the Mid-Atlantic heading up to New England, and you look at the percentage of total land covered by turf grass, Pennsylvania isn't quite as bad as New Jersey, and you've got Delaware and et cetera, but it's still pretty bad. Like over 10% of the entire landmass is covered by turf grass, like one single or like a small mix of species of very shallow rooted plants. that provide very little to no absorption of rainwater or therefore stormwater, and we have to cut the heck out of them to manage them. So we're putting a lot of human energy into managing these landscapes, if you will. And we kind of like kick our stormwater issues to our neighbors by putting turf grass down everywhere. In our kind of subset of the industry, we call it green concrete. And kind of to zero in a little bit more, this is some spring ephemerals from a hiking trail that we go to in Gladwin, pretty close to where we live. And there's an amazing collection of trilliums and trout lilies, among other things. And then you also see the lesser celandine down here. And in a really short period of time, you see things like cutleaf toothwort or Carolina spring beauties completely smothered by lesser celandine, which was introduced, I believe, to the Midwest as an ornamental from Asia, and it's just spread rapidly in the last 2-3 decades across the U.S. And we deal with this in small residential landscapes all the time. It's really become a nightmare. In fact, it just showed up on my street last year, and I swear that it wasn't there in 2023, and in 2024 it was on over half the properties on my little like side street, which is a little L-shaped side street that has about 21 houses on it. It was suddenly everywhere. So I'm scared to see what happens this winter when it starts to emerge again. But we're up against this challenge, not just with lesser celandine, but with all kinds of other plants that were introduced into the landscape because humans have a love for plants. We love gardening. We have this kind of affinity. It keeps us in touch with nature. We like to garden, but sometimes without thinking it through or without the knowledge, we can also unleash some severe environmental damage by releasing the wrong plants into the landscape. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that, we still kind of regard the landscape as something that we have some kind of control over, or we treat it more as a commodity, as in this quote out of Leopold written about. And we've kind of removed ourselves from like understanding that we live in it. And so our daily work is really to kind of re-inspire people and just meet them wherever they are in their understanding of ecology, or even like gardening or a connection to nature. Like we try to inspire on all levels, just to kind of to pull that human curiosity back into focus. And even though sometimes we're developing things with a different aesthetic, our goal is really to inspire and engage, and then kind of like hopefully we're providing that spark that piques people's interest to do something a little bit different with their landscapes. I'm going to zip through this, but I do find it pretty amazing just to think about not just the human, but also just the overall energy that goes into managing our manicured and introduced landscapes. We have to remember that, and there's kind of a saying that we have in our neck of the industry, which is like the green industry is anything but green. We've been sold basically a landscape that requires tons of maintenance, basically for the entire life of the property that you live on. Having to cut grass, which wants to get 3 to 5 feet tall or more, you have to cut it constantly. It's a revenue source for businesses. Hedges, privet hedges, for one, they require constant human intervention. So you're being sold something that then has to be taken care of for forever, basically, in order to keep it from getting completely unruly and taking over your property may be in a way that, looks a lot worse than our more naturalistic landscapes. I don't know, but the but the idea that we've gotten used to this and this is like the normal type of landscape, we have to zoom out a little bit and see like, well, what is that really doing? And I find this particular fact pretty eye-opening. The average American lawn being like a little over half an acre, mowing it over a season produces 1,000 pounds of carbon, which is the equivalent of taking a 100-mile car trip. And that's just doing it like every week or every other week. So just think about the level of carbon being spit into the environment, just so that we can keep this plant that we've decided that we like everywhere under control. I have no problem with lawn, but containing it to a usable space is really the motto that we follow. Have enough room to kick the soccer ball around, allow the kids to run around, or if you have pets, or if you want to have like a little putting green or like whatever it is. No problem with turf grass on a manageable level. But when we have like 90% of our property is turf grass, that's a very different conversation. And just to think about the overall footprint of that. And then we have to think about the management of these landscapes. We have to think about the people that do the management and what they're exposed to. And, I like to think about not just like the health risk, but also what is it doing to our hearing? What is it doing to like the people that are managing space, but also like, every fall when I want to like really like listen to nature, like birds are migrating, the geese are up in the sky, the wind starts to rustle the leaves on trees, and I can't hear any of it a lot of the time because all I hear is like leaf blowers. And I know we all experience that. And a lot of communities, including like Washington, D.C., for instance, have banned gas-powered blowers or gas-powered like lawn equipment in general. And we've done a few projects down there recently, and it really is amazing to hear just how much lower the volume of human intervention in the landscape is just by converting away from gas-powered equipment. But we also like to practice the leave the leaves, so we don't really blow leaves off our property. Maybe we contain some of them, but just to think again about like this is just another moneymaker for companies. Basically, take the gold off of our properties or off of our landscapes, and then we get sold synthetic variants of the fertilizer that those leaves would be providing in a slow breakdown, like right back into the landscape if we didn't take them away. So again, it's kind of like this, it's a practice that we've gotten used to and an aesthetic that we've gotten used to. And like I said, we are considered America's garden capital here in Philadelphia. And I think that there's no better opportunity for us to be this kind of beacon of like hope, or an example of like what could proliferate throughout the country and also internationally, but just by taking some really minor efforts to put plants that have an ecological function in our area, to reintroduce them into the landscape and allow them to not only provide forage, nectar, habitat, you name it, but it's also something that we really focus on, even when it comes to stormwater management. If you think about a forest, there's so many different variations of plant life alone in a forest, or in a riparian buffer along a stream or a river, and the functionality of those plants, they're kind of like they're locking the soil in place, but they're penetrating the soil from a like minute depth down to, like sometimes trees have tap roots that are as deep as we can see into their canopy. And what that's doing is allowing for water to migrate back into the aquifer, like in more of a natural or remnant state. Land is really functioning like a sponge, a lot of it, at least in our area. And but we've removed that function from about 80% of the land that we have around us or more. And so we need to think about not only creating habitat, et cetera, for wildlife, but also as we see this kind of uptick in superstorms, et cetera, like what can we be doing with the plants that we put on our properties that can also like allow that soil to become more of a sponge, if you will, and to reintroduce some. It's a very simple natural process, but just to allow the soil to like drink water again. And so this is, I'm just going to zip through a couple projects that you can see. Some of these are in Narberth. We're taking like very traditional landscapes and converting them back to something that maybe is a bit more naturalistic. And it's also providing, not only stormwater function, but also just we're not necessarily taking away privacy, but we're creating more layered privacy. We call it soft screening, and thinking about ways that we can as I mentioned earlier, create more immersive landscapes so that we feel like we've been like plopped into nature, as opposed to having these kind of like more barren spaces outside. They're not as inviting, and to think about how our landscapes can also be providing both beauty, but also providing just proper function. This is a really interesting property it's on Deal Lake in right near Asbury Park. It's a freshwater lake, so you kind of actually feel like you're in the mountains, but it's only a 2-minute ride to the boardwalk and the beach from here. Very unique area. I believe it's a naturally occurring lake, but they have major stormwater issues. And so a lot of the houses on this property, like they're just lawns going right down to the lake. And so when they have, they've experienced major flooding. And so we've been hired not just to beautify the landscape, but also to help reduce the amount of water and runoff that's going into this. It's one of the only sources of fresh water in the area. In fact, there's a family of river otters that live on this lake. It's pretty cool to see them out and about. And so we kind of break tradition quite a lot, but over time, the more that people see landscapes like this, the more it becomes a new normal. And that's really the secret here. It's just like the more that people see it, the less it becomes this kind of weird thing. Now that we've been doing this work for about a decade, at least in kind of the mainline area, we feel pretty confident that we've allowed our area, the main line, to kind of like convert what they think of when they think of landscapes. They see enough of our projects around, and also other companies that are doing this work, and seeing it more happening in public spaces and in public gardens. We are starting to become more used to and to seeing this kind of aesthetic in the landscape. And we really just want to let people know what they're looking at a little bit more, but we also want to inspire that, like, hey, this is not just either a pretty landscape or something. If you're not as crazy about the naturalistic style, to really think about what it's doing. And this project in particular had major runoff issues that were actually coming over from the neighboring property and flooding out this patio space. And it also just felt like it was really exposed. You wouldn't want to go out there and just sit feeling really like, your neighbors could just wave to you from their window. How could we kind of create this immersive landscape and also at the same time manage the stormwater issues on site and allow this tiny little drain that you see on the right, kind of like to the left of that chair there, like that's the singular drain for a much larger patio than you can actually see, and it just gets overwhelmed without like ripping up the entire patio and kind of adding additional drainage into it. The only other choice we would have is to like manage the stormwater in the landscape itself. And we've seen this aesthetic and this idea catch on. This is Laurel Hill Cemetery. This is their natural burial area, nature sanctuary. And I just kind of like love seeing this juxtaposition of like the mowed lawn in the back with the gravestones, and then you can also get buried in this meadow. And this has become like I don't even think that right now that Laurel Hill can keep up with the popularity that's been created around nature sanctuary, where you can get effectively planted into a meadow when you pass, which is pretty cool. So just to kind of see where this kind of potential is going, it's a great project. You should look it up online and learn more about it. But it's a very powerful experience, even just to go and walk through the gardens. It's open to the public, and I highly recommend going. Our company has helped in some of the more recent phases of the planting of other areas of Laurel Hill to add to nature sanctuary. And this is an aerial kind of showing. It's actually the patio that I showed you earlier. This is it in the back here. This is the property in a whole, which was really just like a lawn leading right up to the foundation of the house. And the homeowner knew he had like way more grass and lawn than he needed, and he's also an astrophysicist and was like very committed to creating positive environmental impact, and also creating a more immersive landscape for his young daughters. So we were hired to kind of convert most of the lawn to meadow, but also to create these curiosity points throughout the landscape, and also create safety, if you will, like creating these buffers from the road, which can be busy during the week. This just allowed for this kind of like layering of the landscape, and this was primarily seeded meadow, so it wasn't a super high ticket item to convert well over half an acre at least of this property to wildflower and native grass meadow. And they also, like I mentioned earlier, had like major stormwater issues. So it took a little time for it to fill in, but and it was kind of like hated by the neighbors at first, and many of them have come around, and it's actually switched. This property has switched owners, and they've taken stewardship of the meadow that they did not choose to install, but they moved from a small property in the city to this property, and have really embraced it once they had a chance to experience it. That was a very cool transition to see from the client perspective. And again, just looking at what we're able to do with really no more cost than it would be to do a more traditional landscape. We're able to put in a more beneficial and also stormwater friendly landscape on suburban properties in particular that have more lawn than they do diverse plant communities. And I like to kind of like look into these visuals a little bit to like really give you a sense of what I'm talking about when I say like, having more diverse root systems. When you look at the cross section of turf grass on the left versus like prairie species on the right, you can see these tap roots, which are actually like, deeper than the plant mass above ground. And what that's doing is allowing these little, they're really just, they're holes in the ground, right? They're allowing the ground to absorb stormwater back into the aquifer. If we look at it on a larger scale, and we do use a lot of prairie plants in our work, primarily plants that are native to the Mid-Atlantic, but we do borrow from areas just south of us, and also out into the prairies of kind of like the Midwest. Our real rule of thumb is that like anything kind of like east of the Mississippi, where plant or an animal communities kind of still have these kind of like symbiotic relationships or really recognize each other, we're okay to borrow a little bit. We don't like to go much past that, but we try to think about like migratory patterns and supporting you know, the animals with the plants that we put in, that they would still recognize. So we're not using like West Coast species that they might not have symbiotic relationships with. And so, you know, just to kind of like zoom in a little bit, we like to take a really like kind of like low impact approach to our work. Plant what belongs, plant selections that are primarily within our region, definitely looking at as best we can. And unfortunately on like the kind of like retail side of things, it's really hard to get access to local ecotypes of various plants that we have. Again, like I said, like the green industry is kind of like anything but green, and it's also an industry, right? So it's like nurseries are producing plants in the easiest way possible. A lot of them are like clonal. So when you get them, they're not grown from seed. So they're not necessarily have like a genetic understanding of maybe like the georegion that you live in, or have that kind of like they might be adapted more to the Midwest. And there's so like little blue stem, for instance, it grows everywhere. There's so many variants of that plant, and there's been a lot of studies that show that like certain plants from like blue stem from different ecoregions behaves very differently once it's like removed from its like happy place, if you will. So the same plant doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do great everywhere. It's really important to be trying to find plants that were where seed was harvested close-ish or within like a relative area to where you live, and that it was really important. And as long as we're coupling that with pulling in plants that are like grown in nurseries, we just don't have the access to it, even on the wholesale, and access to growers. We don't have that in the industry nearly as much as we should. But anyway, I'm kind of going off in a tangent there, but and I'll circle back to that at the end here. But that's like a really important thing that we look into when we're selecting plants. And one of the things I like to really focus in on to like think about, like we're putting plants to work. What are we really doing? Stormwater is just a really great way to look at it. There's lots of talk about like pollinator gardens and wildlife gardens, but one of the things that's overlooked a lot is really thinking about like, you know, how do we put like natural systems back in place? And stormwater is like a really great way to focus on this. So just simple rule of thumb when thinking about managing stormwater is to slow it down, spread it out, and allow the land to soak it back in. The 3 S's of stormwater management. And to zoom in a little bit, when we think about like slowing it down, like to think about like at least the idea of like a filter strip. We see these along roadsides, driveways, putting in plantings that immediately kind of allow runoff from the road to go into it, but also just not run all over it, but hopefully infiltrate into it. And putting plants like switchgrass, or panicum, switchgrass, like other plants that are also able to like manage the toxins that might be coming off the road. Switchgrass, for instance, is really good at like uptaking petroleum pollution, for instance. And so we're thinking about, okay, what plants can we kind of put into these places, not just to slow the water down, but also to uptake the pollution, so it's not going into the ground, but going into like biomass of the plant itself. Again, same kind of idea with something that maybe people are a bit more familiar with is like you see them in parking lots in newer developments, like bioswales that are collecting and like slowing down stormwater, allowing it to seep back into the ground, and sometimes directing it into maybe like a larger stormwater basin. And then the more kind of like, popular rain garden. We actually don't put these in a lot. We do our kind of like a pseudo rain garden. We call them depression garden, where we're basically just taking advantage of low points on properties where we already see stormwater moving to just naturally, like trying to find the point of lowest or like least resistance. And we'll look for those areas like gullies in the ground and we'll plant to them. I'm going to share some of these slides for attendees to kind of have to, I'll put together a little slide pack with some plant sourcing later, and I'll include this one, but it's just as like, again, like kind of a really good way to kind of like look at the power of plants in the landscape. And to think not about what we're just looking at above ground, but what's happening below ground. What are they really doing? And I just really appreciate this image in illustrating that. So a lot of times when we're evaluating a landscape, we're looking for really like telltale signs. Like, I mean, this is like a really obvious picture, but a gully like this in a lawn might be a perfect spot to put in a little. We might create like a dry stream bed or something that effectively act like a dry stream bed, where maybe we introduce some stone or some logs and things like that, and also interplant between them and kind of use it as like it's become a stream in through this lawn. Well, let's not like let's kind of like utilize this as a natural feature of the property. We did a project recently for the Media Upper Providence Library, where we took that really to heart. They had just a lawn with major stormwater like runoff issues, I would say, where it was a more like newly developed library. And so we developed this immersive landscape that was kind of like an educational space outside of a public library, but also something that was providing some very like much needed stormwater management. This is what it looked like after construction about 10 years ago, I think. And we converted it to a really functional and immersive stormwater management landscape, but also something that is educational for anyone to walk through. But it's become very popular with kids attending the library. But just to kind of, I like looking at this project as like a really simple way of like going, it was a lawn, but look what it is now. This tiny little like pocket park, if you will, but it's also functioning as a stormwater management system. And we do a lot of integrated build work as part of our design work. And so we're trying to think about not just the plants that we're putting in the ground, but also how do they relate to the materials that we're using and the plants that we're putting in. And so in this boardwalk that you can see, child walking across, that's sustainably harvested bald cypress, which is also this tree that's like starting to go dormant, kind of in the middle right of the picture. That's smack in the middle of our rain garden. So we have both the kind of lumber that this tree would produce, and we're also showing how the tree would function in its natural conditions, and also can function in a residential or a public landscape as a plant that's doing its job in like the middle of a rain garden, absorbing a lot of the stormwater that fills up into the rain garden basin. And if you're familiar with bald cypress, they're the trees that kind of make up the swamps of the South. And so this is just, I just really appreciate this project from a standpoint of like creating engagement and piquing curiosity, as I've kind of gone back to a few times in the presentation. And it was also, this was this was just after, this wasn't even a full year after it was planted. But this was it, kind of like a few months after we'd done the initial install. And so you can see where we took these downspouts and created these little dry stream beds that move kind of right to left into a rain garden. And so when it rains, you can really see the function of this space. But it also has a naturalistic feel to it. It doesn't feel forced, and it doesn't feel like you're just looking at a bunch of stormwater infrastructure. It feels like you're in a landscape or in a little tiny park, but it's got we've been able to restore some of the natural function to the space. And to kind of like break the stigma of native landscapes being kind of like really naturalistic or kind of feeling out of place in more traditional spaces. This is the Marion Tribute House in Marion Station, PA, and they host a lot of weddings and events here. And this was like a before picture. Obviously, they had a lot of issues with this, like with turf right up close to the building, and kind of, it didn't look very nice, but it was also creating erosion and stormwater issues for them, because there's actually, you can't see it, but there's like downspouts that are kind of integrated, like dumping into this tiny little island of grass. And so in a storm, it was an absolute mess. So we were hired to kind of beautify the space, create somewhere that they could use for wedding ceremonies, and also help conquer stormwater issues that we were having. And so we did a more traditional landscape, if you will, like putting in a fountain that would kind of fit the architecture of the space, but it's a fully native landscape. Here you're seeing a lot of Penstemon digitalis in bloom in spring, but something that's a bit more structured. But still, again, it's like we're utilizing all native shrubs, perennials, and grasses in this space. It's just structured and blocked more like a traditional landscape, or something that has more of that kind of English garden or French garden style. There's not as many mixed colors at any given time. Like we kind of block this to be more in like kind of blues and whites to play off of the color of the stone, etc. But just to show how a native landscape can also translate to a space that doesn't look just like a meadow. It's got a bit more structure to it, but still speaks to the space. And we've had great success in managing the stormwater issue that they used to have in that island. If we go to like a more modern or contemporary property, like this is one that we converted to native landscapes from something that was like far more traditional. It just had like really tight like boxwood hedges and things around it. And but the homeowner still wanted to keep something that was very like blocked and structured. And so we used a lot of Discampsia here, which is like a semi-evergreen shade tolerant grass that we used with a backdrop of Amsonia hubractii. And we created this wood cladding to the right, which is like kind of this like blank wall there of their garage, just to create like some texture and dynamics, but still keep a rather blocked and more like linear landscape. You can see it kind of from the side here. Excuse me, let me just clear my throat for a sec. And then this was actually, this is now Boyd's department store. This is in Wayne, Pennsylvania. It's one of our more public facing projects. It was the original anthropology store. Beautiful Art Deco space. And for anyone that might have been familiar with the anthropology store, it already had a pretty cool looking landscape when it was first first became anthropology. I think actually before that it was a Chrysler dealership and an auto repair shop in the 50s and 60s. But it's just a beautiful site. But it had fallen into disrepair and it was like very unkempt. So we were able to kind of keep some of the larger trees in place, but the owners of Boyd's wanted to do something that was like not just like kind of aesthetically fit their vibe or the vibe of the building, but was also something that would be like relatively low maintenance. And also this sits right on Route 30, Lancaster Avenue. So it's like a very heavily traveled corridor. So in the winter it would get salt spray from the road. So we had to kind of, and it's like super exposed to sunlight. So we had to figure out how to make this landscape work with very little human intervention. And when we were kind of talking earlier about like filter strips and things, this is like a really nice example of like, you can see just like right on this roadside here, that we created this this is kind of like a border planting along the sidewalk, but it was engineered with plants that can take a decent amount of road salt, and also creates this kind of like nice and very like naturalistic aesthetic that looks great both in the summer and in the winter, preserving the seed heads, etc., of the plants. Again, you can see the kind of like the same translation in this like kind of more modern entrance to a new like a modern house renovation. And sometimes we'll even go like even more kind of monochromatic, and just putting in lots of grasses, warm season grasses. Again, this is like little blue stem and panicum primarily, switchgrass, to just create something that was very structured, but also has a very specific job in the landscape. Like there was stormwater and flooding issues that would come over from the neighbor's house, where you can kind of see this like white vinyl fence behind the grasses. Water would rush underneath that fence. They had major issues with like flooding into the, not just their patio, but also getting into the house. And so we created, they didn't want to have a crazy amount of like plant diversity, but we still played around with various andropogons, blue stems, and panicums to create this kind of somewhat monochromatic but very functional landscape. And again, you can kind of see like this is one of our first projects that we worked on in 2015, converting a very traditional like 80s, early 90s property in Devon. To these clients are avid birders, and so you can see their property used to look like the houses on the right, and now it's kind of like the pinnacle property in this neighborhood. Like kids will actually ask if they can come into the property and like go and like hang out and look for birds and things. So it's become this thing that was like, it was definitely like something that wasn't well received at first, but over time, once people started to like get used to it, now it's this thing that's like, you know, it's very popular. Like parents will like send their kids over there to like engage with nature. So I think that's kind of cool. Just be able to walk up the street rather than have to go to a park. Here's it kind of in it's a different perspective, the same property. And it all used to be long grass. It was the entire thing was long grass, except for that dogwood that's behind these behind the Joe Pyeweed and the goldenrod. And this is the backyard, which was all lawn, and it bled right into the neighbor's lawn. So you could see right into the property behind them. And so it's not actually that big of a property, but it looks a lot bigger because we've softened all the fence lines. And so as a design trick, if you will, by kind of erasing human lines and delineations, you feel like the space is far more expansive. And again, I'll share some of these slides, but we kind of, there is some thought and like there's study behind this. And so we'll embrace the idea of prospect and refuge in our design work. Understanding how like in human nature, we like to feel like that we're kind of like coddled by the space that we're in, that we feel safe in it, but that we also have vantage points so that we can see out, like look for danger, maybe. When we translate that into our landscape design, we're really just looking for ways to both immerse, but also like look out. So if we can kind of erase boundaries, if you will, you really can't see where this property ends and the other property begins. And that's just a really important way for us to kind of feel both the expanse of nature, but also feel immersed by it. And again, we have to kind of learn how to manage these spaces and to do it in a way where it still feels naturalistic, but it's also like that it doesn't get completely wild. Like just because you have a meadow doesn't mean you have like a ton of yard space, and it's very easy for these plants to kind of like flop into the lawn or whatever. So there's some basic tricks that you can deploy to manage landscapes so they still feel naturalistic, but you know, there's still some human intervention. And we put these together for our clients, just like basic, call them like our landscape stewardship schedules that kind of show the various types of work that we might do in a more naturalistic landscape throughout the season. And we're really looking at, you know, some basic like principles that we use as business. We really like focus and try to encourage our clients to see beauty in the understated. Consider 4-season landscapes. Consider that the seed head has its own kind of power, very similar to a flower, and to just create that spark that draws us into observing nature with a bit more detail or reverence or curiosity. And again, looking for opportunities to reduce or replace lawn. And we use pine straw, we use pine needles instead of wood mulch. But we also try as much as we can to just let leaves stay in the garden beds. And over time, our goal really is to like allow especially herbaceous plants to grow together so that you really don't need mulch at all. You just kind of let the landscape take care of itself. And we do a lot of work in the built environment again. This is actually in my backyard. I have a hot tub, a grill, fire pit, sitting area, but it's all like very contained and kind of like aesthetically balanced with a more naturalistic landscape. And it's a very small space. Like my backyard is about like 20 by 35. But you can put quite a lot in that space and still have it feel like it's larger than it looks and feeling more expansive. There's a smaller property in Asbury Park, kind of did the same thing. And again, just kind of like softening property lines. This is a meadow border that we put in a project out in Malvern, where it just looked like a big rectangle before we extended the woodland edge out and created contour lines. It really just changes the dynamic of a space that felt very suburban and very kind of like just like a cookie cutter landscape that you would see everywhere. And again, creating immersive play space for children, a huge part of our business and just a great opportunity. And again, this isn't a huge property, it's just a small space, but as soon as you kind of envelop it with plants and kind of like just soften the lines around it, it becomes this more immersive place for children to explore in. This is from a display from the 2021 flower show, where we had a very fun kind of like stormwater management themed display that was also, kids really loved running across these. This is a black locust permeable walkway. And I'll share this again. We just have like some basic common practices that we employ as a company, but also that can be embraced by even just home gardeners. And I'll share this too, but these are just like some great resources for purchasing native seed, and also like more eco-regional plants, especially Pinelands Nursery in New Jersey. They're amazing with they have plugs and seed. They have a retail side to the business now that gives you access to a lot of like regional ecotypes of plants that you can deploy in your own landscape. And again, just if we think about kind of like thought leaders in our area, and also just some really good reading material. If you're not familiar, Nature's Best Hope, Doug Tallamy, he's an entomologist from the University of Delaware. Just an incredible speaker, and he's really kind of just like kicked off this whole native plant movement across the country. Larry Weiner, he's just an incredible resource for. He's been doing what our company does since the 80s, and we're super lucky to have him in our area, and he actually has a wonderful New Directions in the American Landscape is that he runs every year. It's a really great. I don't even know it. I'm sorry. I'm like kind of like losing my my words at this point. But they just hosted it this year at Temple. It's just like a speaker series, and it's a really great way to educate yourself. And then Claudia West and Thomas Rayner, but Claudia West was worked at North Creek Nursery for a number of years, and is now working nationally and internationally as a landscape architect, but just like an amazing plant expert, really understands our area. And we used to work with Claudia a lot when she worked at North Creek Nurseries to help us like figure out what the best plants for various properties were. And this is just an amazing book. So with that, we'll switch over to the Q&A. It looks like we still have a little bit of time for it. I did talk a little more than I was planning to, but that happens when I'm doing this stuff on Zoom. I get like into a little, I go into a tunnel. So apologies for that, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And yeah, thank you again.
Well, that was great, Jeff. And we got a bunch of questions here, and I'm going to try to lump them. For example, regarding meadow maintenance, do native grasses have to be cut down at the end of the fall, for example? And how do you deal with weeds in a meadow? And I think there's more questions in that vein, but that's the first couple questions.
Yeah, no, so that's great. So we keep our grasses in meadows. We only mow in March, because grasses are kind of a staple overwintering habitat for insects and birds, et cetera. So we leave them up, and also structurally they kind of hold the meadow together. So we mow them down once like birds kind of like would leave that area after overwintering there. And the same thing with the insects that might be there. So grasses we're only cutting back in March. In terms of managing weeds in a meadow, that's a multi-level question. There's so many different ways to deal with that. I mean, like primarily we really try to get our site preparation done at the beginning, meaning that and there's a bunch of different ways to do this. sometimes we have to deploy a low level application of herbicide a few times to just like kill, especially if there's like a lot of invasive plants that are present. You're just not going to be able to establish an indigenous meadow if you have tons of invasive plant pressure. So you really have to kind of like it's site specific by nature, and actually going back to that Garden Revolution, the Larry Weiner's book that I featured a couple slides back. That's an incredible resource for kind of tackling the idea of putting meadows on your property, and it kind of goes through a bunch of different like site prep and also establishment techniques. So I would definitely recommend using that as a resource.
But there's a related question about how much work do you have to do on the soil with trying to get deep-rooted plants going?
So that's a great question. We do very little.
Hmm.
Our goal really is like a lot of meadow plants, and that's a really broad range of plants. They'll really thrive in like crappy soil, like soil that doesn't have high fertility rates, I guess is what I should say. It's not crappy, but like based on like if we're thinking about, if we're weighing it out with what we might think about more like fertile, like agricultural land, you'll actually have like kind of like opposite results. You want to like over time, we're not fertilizing meadows. If anything, we even sometimes we'll even use granulated sulfur to like knock the fertility level down if we really need to, if it's been like a heavily manicured lawn for a number of years, because otherwise those plants are going to come up. They've got like way too much going on. They're kind of like it's like a shot in the vein. They just like keel over. You see a lot of like upright like prairie or meadow plants will just flop when the fertility level is too high. So it's so I hope that I'm answering the question, but it's like kind of like the opposite. We're trying to do very little to the soil. If anything, kind of like leave it alone and allow it to kind of like rebalance itself.
There's a person that very curious about sourcing plants, and you mentioned that in a previous slide, and this will be available. That slide will be available and accessible through the Conservancy website or through you directly, right? The question.
I'm gonna provide I'll provide a handout. We'll send a link out. I'll provide a handout with some of the sourcing.
Yeah, this is somebody in Eastern Massachusetts, and the wholesale plugs and sedge sources he says are in the Midwest and further, and I think that's true. So the local
native plant trusts in New England, native plant trust is incredible. It's in Massachusetts. As a plant source. And there's also the Wild Seed Project out of Maine, another incredible resource. It's like local to that area. And Native Plant Trust is like super cutting edge. I wish they were actually closer to here. So that's a great resource for both like sourcing plants, but also for just kind of seeing what's going to work in your geo region.
Here's a super specific question, but I think it's a good one. In the side of your backyard, what is the grass where your fire pit sits?
That's a great question. So, my backyard is an experiment. So it has been both a Carex lawn. It was Carex Leavenworthii was the first round of kind of like no-mow lawn that we tried out. Like we had one really stormy, I guess it was like late spring, where my kids had a bunch of friends over, and it can handle a certain amount of foot traffic, but it got really wet back there. It's a very small space, and they just like trampled it to death while it was like, and so we replaced some of it with fine fescue, like it's a native grass mix, Festuca rubra, creeping red fescue. There's a couple varieties of it. planted that to kind of like mix in with the sedge. That's worked out okay. Now it just kind of like they just kind of like happily exist together.
I think you just answered a question. Somebody's asking what might address stormwater in very wet conditions, like we had last winter when most of the grasses and perennial are dormant. And I think you basically just answered that question that came in as you were talking. Excuse me just a second. I think there was an important early question was whether you engaged at all in larger projects, whether you can transition this to more corporate or institutional. I mean, you showed the library, for example. But...
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the beauty of like working in landscapes. Plants grow, right? There's various ways to kind of like scale landscapes up, or like planting areas, just deploying the right, not just like the right plants, but also like the right methodology. Like we're working on a larger project in like multi-acre project in old agricultural area in New Jersey, and it's well over 200 acres, and it's a combination, like the design work right now is a combination of creating windbreaks with woody plants, and then also developing seeded meadow areas. So you can apply this like one of the areas that our company is moving into is looking at how corporations and like corporate headquarters for companies that might purchase carbon offsets, et cetera, could actually could do a lot of that work on their own properties, which when you go past a lot of corporate office complexes, it's lots of lawn grass and lots of trees and like kind of foundation plantings and not much else. And these companies are investing significant money in the sustainability efforts and purchasing carbon credits, and that land is just like, it's like a sitting duck for like transforming it into something that could be functional on their own property, and where you can be doing like sequestering carbon on your own site. So there's any number of ways to kind of like deploy this philosophy, and I think that's really kind of still relatively untapped in terms of how we really should be like looking at that land.
Scaling up a little bit, we have a question about what trees or shrubs do you tend to use around a meadow space?
Great question. So a lot of times we're looking at, like, we'll occasionally consider putting in some wolf trees. Like what we mean by that is, like, if you're looking out into like a pastoral landscape and you might see like an oak sitting really majestically in the middle of a meadow or a prairie or something like that, we might kind of look for an opportunity to do that as a way to kind of like break up a really open space. But most of the time we're looking at understory trees that we can kind of incorporate into like a lower expansive herbaceous or ground layer plantings, just to kind of like break up the visual kind of like framework in a way that you add depth by just creating these little kind of like triangulated, I guess they're kind of like trees. Like trees primarily anchor the landscape, and then shrubs provide this kind of like a certain level of structure that herbaceous plants can then kind of like soften, if you will. So like in small spaces, we're looking at we use a lot of Magnolia virginiana, sweet bay magnolia, as this kind of nice, it's like a understory tree. So it grows 25 to 30 feet tall. It's great for softening the corners of houses because you can still see through it. And there's a lot of like evergreen to semi-evergreen varieties of it. And that just allows, like, as soon as you start blocking a property, even somewhere small with pillars and then like kind of lower foundational plants, that's how we deploy woody plants on a lot of our projects. I hope that helps answer the question, but it's this kind of like way of just like, we want to soften corners. It's basically like taking away some of the human intervention in the landscape, right? Like we have like you don't see too many corners in nature, and so if we can soften corners with plants, we kind of like then a landscape that's surrounding a house makes it feel more immersive. If that makes sense. That's really like most of our job, to be quite honest with you, is making is like creating a less static landscape.
We're getting close to needing to wrap up, and there's a lot of very interesting questions. I think we got about 80 to 85% of the questions, a lot of participation here. Christy's going to summarize those questions and submit them to you to see which, if any, were unanswered, although I think most were answered in one way or another. I would recommend that everybody look at those books that you mentioned, because the answers are in those several volumes. I do want to ask the question I told you I was going to ask you, and that was your background, because you did not start out in horticulture and landscape design, and I think you have an interesting thing to say about that, and that would be.
Yeah, that's right, Rob. Yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier. I guess there's a sensibility to our work that comes a little bit from my background. I also worked as a composer and a sound designer primarily in theater for a number of years, and it's really interesting that both landscape design and sound design share very similar sensibilities. It was my job as a sound designer or a composer to like, even if you're sitting in a black box theater, it was my job to give this like sonic transportation of like where, like to allow you to feel like you were in a space that would allow your imagination to kind of pick up where the black box leaves off. It was this supporting cast, if you will, for what, maybe the story or it was kind of like the backdrop. We like to think that like a really good sound design or a really good score for a movie or a theater show is something that you don't necessarily go, oh, the sound was incredible in that show. That's it's a better compliment to almost like not notice it, because then that means that you were transported. Like it's kind of a funny sensibility to like, if you did a really good job of like just creating this immersive space, you might not even notice that the sound was like component, because it allowed you to be even more present in the moment. And so I would like, at the end of a show, if someone didn't compliment the sound, I was fine with that, because I was like, I did my job. And we see it all the time when we're doing, especially like work on like new builds. The landscape is always like the last consideration, but it ends up being like somewhat like the most important in a way. It's like we're the icing on the cake. There's usually less money to put towards it, but we'll always figure out a way to make it work. But like, it's really the thing that like puts it all together. Like we like to think about landscapes as like, we'd rather that it look like the house was dropped into the landscape rather than the landscape was forced around the house. And so those two kind of sensibilities of like sound design and landscape design kind of go together, kind of, I hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's even better. It's even as interesting or more interesting than the original version of that I heard.
Cool.
Very intriguing. I think it explains a lot about how your work is going and the directions it's taking, and how it really meets human needs through plants. I'm sorry to have to stop this. I think we could go on indefinitely, given the kinds of questions that have been coming in. But I need now to hand it back to David to say goodbye to us. And thanks so much, Jeff. It was just terrific.
Very good.
Thank you,
Oh,
Rob.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's give a virtual Round of applause to Jeff or actual.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a great presentation. A lot of good content, and I learned a lot myself. I'm sure other people did as well. And just to reiterate what Rob said, that we have a copy of all the questions, so we'll just double check if some of the questions weren't answered, and you'll get a follow-up message addressing that and some other information, as Jeff said. So thank you all again. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Ask the Experts event. Thanks. Take care.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Bye.